The bell over the cafe door rang every morning at 6:12 a.m., and Matthew always felt it in his chest before he heard it with his ears, like a warning and a promise wrapped into the same small sound. The street outside was still gray, the kind of gray that made people question their choices, and steam rose from the espresso machine as if the room itself was breathing. That was when she came in, day after day, sitting by the window with her hands wrapped around a cup she didn't seem ready to drink. Have you ever noticed someone so consistently that their absence would feel louder than any noise? What if one quiet stranger became the most familiar part of your day without you realizing why? Matthew owned the cafe, a narrow place wedged between a laundromat and a closed-down bookstore in a small town in Oregon. He had opened it after his life cracked open in ways he never talked about. After the divorce papers and the empty apartment, after discovering that silence could be heavier than grief. The cafe was his way of staying busy, of filling hours with grinding beans and wiping counters so he didn't have to sit alone with his thoughts. Most customers rushed in and out, grabbing coffee like it was fuel instead of comfort. But she never rushed. Her name, he later learned, was Hannah, and she came every morning without fail, wearing the same tired sweater in different shades, her eyes always drifting toward the window as if she were waiting for something that never arrived. At first, Matthew noticed only the surface details. He noticed how she always ordered the same thing and how she paid an exact change, how she smiled politely but never lingered. He noticed the way she sat with her shoulders slightly hunched, protecting something invisible. It was easy to assume she was just another lonely soul passing through, another customer among hundreds. But loneliness has a way of leaving fingerprints, and slowly, without permission, those fingerprints began to show up in Matthew's own chest. Watching her sit alone every morning stirred something he had tried hard to bury, a reminder of what it felt like to wake up with no one asking how you slept. The cafe became a place of unspoken rituals. The sun climbed the windows a little higher each day, the regulars nodded without speaking, and Hannah's cup cooled untouched for long minutes before she took a sip. Matthew found himself watching her more than the clock, wondering about the life she returned to when she left. Did anyone notice if she didn't come home? Did anyone sit across from her at a table anymore? These questions crept into his thoughts while he locked up at night, while he ate dinner alone over the sink. If this were you, would you reach out, or would you stay quiet, afraid of opening a door you couldn't close? Hannah's story was written in small signs rather than big confessions. There was the faint tremble in her hands on particularly cold mornings, the dark circles that deepened after holidays passed, the way her eyes softened when she watched families walk by outside. Matthew began to recognize that look because he had worn it himself once, back when his house was still full and his heart hadn't learned how to brace for disappointment. The cafe had saved him in some ways, but it had also become a hiding place. Serving coffee was easier than admitting he missed being needed. One morning, Hannah didn't come. The bell stayed silent at 6:12, and Matthew felt an unreasonable panic bloom in his chest. He told himself it was nothing, that people missed days all the time, but the hours dragged on with an unfamiliar weight. The next morning, she was back, looking smaller somehow, as if the night had taken something from her. It was then that he noticed the redness around her eyes, the way she held her cup tighter than usual. The realization hit him quietly but firmly, like a truth he could no longer ignore. She wasn't just a woman who liked quiet mornings. She was lonely, deeply lonely, and maybe she was coming here because this place was the closest thing to home she had left. From that day on, Matthew's own loneliness became impossible to deny. He saw it mirrored in Hannah, and it forced him to confront the emptiness he had learned to live with. He thought about the mornings after his marriage ended, the way he used to sit at his kitchen table staring at a cold cup of coffee, wondering how a life could unravel so completely. The cafe had given him purpose, but it hadn't given him connection. Watching Hannah sit alone every day felt like watching a version of himself who had never found the courage to reach out. Change came slowly, almost invisibly. Matthew started paying attention in new ways, leaving the lights a little warmer, setting a small plant on the windowsill where Hannah sat. He learned the rhythm of her mornings, the days she lingered longer, the days she left early. Hannah noticed too, though neither of them acknowledged it. There was comfort in the shared silence, in knowing someone else existed in the same space, breathing the same air. Sometimes, kindness doesn't arrive as a grand gesture, but as a quiet presence that says you are not invisible here. Winter gave way to spring, and the town softened around them. Flowers bloomed in window boxes, and the mornings grew lighter. Hannah's shoulders relaxed a little, and Matthew found himself smiling more without realizing why. They were still two lonely people, but the space between them had changed. It was filled now with understanding, with the unspoken knowledge that pain doesn't have to be explained to be recognized. If you were standing in that cafe watching them, would you see two strangers or two souls learning how to survive together? One morning, Hannah didn't come again, and this time she didn't return the next day, or the day after that. Matthew waited, counting the minutes, the hours, the mornings, feeling something ache that surprised him with its intensity. He realized then how much her presence had mattered, how her quiet routine had anchored him in ways he hadn't admitted. The cafe felt emptier, the bell over the door suddenly cruel in its silence. He wondered if he had missed his chance, if he had mistaken familiarity for permanence. Weeks later, on a rainy morning that smelled like endings and beginnings all at once, the bell rang again at 6:12. Hannah stepped inside, looking older and stronger, her eyes still tired but steadier now. Matthew felt a swell of emotion he hadn't expected, a mix of relief and regret. In that moment, he understood that loneliness doesn't disappear overnight, but it can be softened by being seen. The cafe had been a refuge for both of them, a place where two broken timelines overlapped just enough to remind them they were still alive. As Hannah took her seat by the window once more, Matthew realized something quietly beautiful. They hadn't saved each other in dramatic ways. They hadn't fixed what was broken. They had simply shared space, shared mornings, shared silence, and in doing so, they had reminded each other that loneliness doesn't mean unlovable. Sometimes it just means waiting. Before the story ends, I want to ask you something from the heart. Have you ever been a Matthew or a Hannah, quietly showing up somewhere just to feel less alone? If so, share your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story truly touched your heart, gently reminding you of kindness, regret, hope, or the power of second chances, please consider liking, commenting, sharing, and subscribing, so more hearts can find stories like this when they need them most.